One thing that I've been seeing a lot more in my comments, and this is all the way back from the Goku versus Superman video, and most recently in the Vegeta versus Doctor Doom video, is there is such a huge disconnect between anime people and comic book people. And it's usually the comments you see are the anime fans saying comic book fans don't understand anything about anime, and the comic book fans say, it's the other way around. And I've just been seeing a ton of it lately, and I want to kind of talk to why I think that this is the case, that these things seem to be so misunderstood by one another, right? And I think it really does come down to, and I touched on this in the Goku v Superman video and the follow-up video. I think it has to do with how power is categorized and how it's measured in each of these mediums, because it is different. For example, in the comic book world, a big part of it is strength, obviously, right? And when they say strength, they mean like lifting power.
It seems impossible.
But it isn't. You're lifting 200 quintillion tons.
And the big feats for the characters are usually like, he held up the universe, he like lifted up the universe, like someone like Superman. Or, he's this strong, he was able to survive this, or something, something, something. But it's usually like that. Or when it comes to speed, it's like he ran this fast. He was running at 1 attosecond, he was doing whatever. It's some quantifiable numerical value that they have accomplished. And that's typically how it's measured, and you're like, okay, well that makes sense. But when it comes to anime, when they say strength, they really mean power, right? Like when they say like, oh, he's strong. They don't mean he can bench press a lot. They mean that he's a powerful person. And that's displayed usually not from a numerical, scalable, countable feat like he lifted 10 billion tons. It's usually like more of a show of power. Like he takes a step and the earth shatters, or everyone in a 10-mile radius passes out, or he shoots a laser beam that blows up a star. Whenever they're fighting, they'll say that the blow was felt throughout the entire universe, something like that. And I think that's the big difference, is sort of this more quantifiable numerical approach to specific stats like strength and speed and whatever, versus a more interpretable power scaling that has to do with how power is shown. So that can make it difficult, if you put a comic book and anime character up against one another. That can make it hard to see who's more powerful than who, because there isn't a lot of crossover in that regard, right? And with the comic book people, is one of the problems I had with Superman is that can lead to some inconsistency and some weird scenes, right? Because you have this quantifiable thing, but then they're breaking the laws of physics anyways, or it's grossly outside of what they're normally able to do, something like that. But for the anime people, it's a lot more flexible, right? Because it's like the power does fluctuate a little bit, but it's usually tied to some sort of willpower thing, or like a hype scale. And hype absolutely plays into it. Comic book characters, for some reason, just have like zero hype in their own books. And I think that's partially due to the art style a lot of the times. I think it's due to the storytelling also. Having the stories be usually shorter and less long lasting compared to like a manga or something like that, so the hype can't be built quite the same way. But the hype of anime characters, I think, absolutely plays into it as far as power scaling or perception of power and stuff like that. Because like Superman, when he's fighting, there's never a moment like Goku going Super Saiyan for the first time, or something like that. Like just the pure raw hype, or Goku going Ultra Instinct, or Luffy going into Gear 5, which we recently saw, something like that. That type of thing just doesn't really exist, because it's hard to build it up in comics anyways, because they usually don't have super long runs and different teams get involved and stuff like that. So it is more difficult, but it absolutely, I think, plays a role. And I think a good example is something like this. I'm not a big sports fan, but if you had like a basketball player who on paper has like all these great stats, it's like, oh, he makes his threes consistently. He's got like a 80% free throws on the line. Got good passing. He's a good team player. All around, he's a really, really good, solid player. But then there's this other basketball player who maybe he doesn't hit all of his free throws, maybe he's not as good with his threes, maybe he's not the best at passing and everything. But when he gets the ball, he'll drive it down the center and he'll dunk on somebody and he'll shatter the backboard. And the whole crowd will be screaming. It's like if somebody says, like, who do you want on your team? Who would win between these two guys? Like, on paper, maybe one guy looks better. Or you can make some case for, like, well, if you look at this stat compared to this stat and this stat compared to this stat. But on the other hand, if the guy's out there making insane moves like that, it's just going to draw in that hype naturally, and that person's going to be favored, right? I think it's kind of something similar. Or the comic book characters, I admit, probably do have the stats on their side, just because everything is so quantifiable and numerical most of the time. I think intentionally. But the hype of these anime characters can't be understated, and I think that a lot of the time is what gives the perception that they are more powerful, or maybe leads to them being more powerful, right? Because there's that part of, like, Goku, for example. His upper limit really hasn't been reached because every time he's getting beat by an enemy, right, he just goes beast mode, levels up, and gets the job done. You don't really see that thing on the comic book side quite the same. So I think that's sort of a major confusion between the two is how power is quantified and how strength is measured, and how that because of that you can't really compare apples to apples these two mediums, and so that can make it kind of difficult to have that conversation. On one side it's usually some textbook numbers, or someone will state that somebody can do something, da 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 da. On the anime side, it's more shown and displayed, like, here's me doing something cool versus, extrapolating from a set of stats that I could do something cool, something like that. But let me know what you guys think, if that makes sense or not, and I'll see you in the next video.